In closing, again, I'd like to emphasize the importance of balancing the creative and the technology and the management. And this was about the topic of serialized content, but it holds true in any sort of creative endeavors that we do, I believe. And we're in an industry where nothing is really static. Everything changes, the environment changes, requirement changes, the trend changes, and so this will teeter or it may totter, but it's cool. It's cool. I mean, it's cool that it's not static. We have to deal with this stuff, and in this process, we try to balance it ultimately, and in the sense that nothing is static in our industry, I also believe that the concept of good is never static. A good content is never static. And so all the more, I think all of us have to aspire to create greatness, excellence, beyond good. And only that can we sustain ourselves as good, maybe just for instance. And so if you just aspire for good enough, it's never going to be good enough. You have to aspire for beyond good. You have to aspire to excellence.
1983年、大阪大学でリンクさんは開発されました。で、友達の大村浩一先生と1年間、まずメタボールソフトウェアでリンクス1という並列処理マシンでグロースモデルをアニメーション化しました。
One of the first appearances of CG in anime was in the 1983 film Golgoth 13, using the Lynx 1 computer to create this extended helicopter scene. It looks silly now, but it was revolutionary at the time. Produced by Professor Koichi Omura and a group of his students at Osaka University, this set the stage for digital anime production. The next year, researchers from both Japan and the United States collaborated on a few select scenes to be included in the anime movie Lensman. This film saw the Japanese Computer Graphics Lab team up with the New York Institute of Technology to develop a CG opening. Some of the team at NYIT were involved in the CG for Star Wars and Future Worlds, and it's because of JCGL founder Mitsuru Kaneko, who passed away just last year, that this collaboration was able to happen. In fact, he went to NYIT years prior to develop a system for digital compositing in an anime, hoping it would speed up the process. Problem was, he was about 15 years too early. CGI was a place for research, and it was advancing rapidly in the 80s, but the world of Japanese CG production at that time wasn't about making art, it was about creating something technically special. Golgoth 13 didn't need a CG helicopter. Lensman didn't need this opening sequence or this Tron-like chase scene. These were the advances of passionate researchers who believed in this technology. So for me, the person who turned the perspective from research to art was the interviewee you saw earlier, Yoichiro Kawaguchi.
1982年の、夏前から始まって1983年の春まで、1年弱かかりました。で、作品タイトルはグロース・ミステリアス・ギャラクシーで、世界中の人はびっくりしました。なんといってもピクサーの CEO のエドウィン・カットマルはこれはベストワンと言って褒めてくれました。
Kawaguchi worked together with Koichi Omura to develop the Lynx 1 computer, but instead of making CG helicopters, he created Growth Model, an algorithm based on nature that would create organic-like 3D forms and shapes that even impressed Pixar's president at the time. So if you ask me, Koichi Omura, Mitsuru Kaneko, and Yoichiro Kawaguchi are the pioneers of Japanese CG animation. The research they did, along with assistance from leading universities, helped build up a CG CG industry in Japan that contributed to medicine, games, animation, and live-action productions. 3D elements weren't uncommon to see as a part of 2D anime in the 1990s, like Cowboy Bebop and Ghost in the Shell. And because we're talking about the 80s and 90s, many of these figures who helped elevate 3D in Japanese animation are still around today, but there's kind of a split in approaches when you get into the 2000s.
Our first feature, though, is Final Fantasy. You probably heard about this movie if you haven't seen it. It's the first computer-generated feature that attempts to have truly lifelike human characters. And this movie it's really amazing. The characters' faces, the way they move, it's all very impressive what computers can do these days.
In 2001, Square Enix released Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within by setting up a studio in Hawaii, the middle point between Japan and the mainland US, to create it. Today, the film is regarded as revolutionary for realistic CG animation and also the perfect definition of the words Uncanny Valley. Regardless, even though it was a commercial failure and resulted in the shutdown of Square Pictures, it was a landmark in regards to CG development in games and film. Meanwhile, companies like Digital Frontier were developing advanced 3D animation that attempted to emulate the aesthetic of 2D anime, such as the film Appleseed. So we kind of had these two approaches, realistic and cel-shaded. Ironically enough, Appleseed has actually been both of these in the form of the 2004 film and Appleseed Alpha produced at Solar Digital Arts. But 3D was still an outlier in the noughties, and its main purpose, both today and 19 years ago, was to find methods of amplifying 2D work. This was the case with Satellite for a while, who before producing their very first series, spent their time creating 3D elements for other studios' shows. IKIF was around at that time too, the husband and wife-led CG team responsible for the CG in Patlabor in 1989 and Ghost in the Shell Innocence in 2004. Even Ghibli got in on the action, applying CGI for parts of Princess Mononoke in the late 90s. But if we're talking about early adopters of CG in anime, the studio most will remember from that period is Gonzo, and the very clever name of Digimation.
当時樋口さんとかも Mac でですね、いろんな画像合成とかをやるようになってきて、それを見てこうコンピューターで作る映像とか画像っていうものにすごく未来があるんじゃないかなと思いまして、それでアニメーションスタジオを作って、フルデジタルで作ることにしました。
This digital approach at the studio was a catalyst for director Yasufumi Sawajima. He now works for David Production on JoJo's Bizarre Adventure openings and endings, and on the visual direction for parts of the series itself. But back then, he was 3D director on Last Exile and Final Fantasy Unlimited, digital director on Gankutsu, and although it may not hold up today, Gonzo and Sawajima's approach influenced the animators at the studio, who in turn went to form their own companies. This early 2000s period was instrumental for the new generation of 3D creators in anime. Both David Production and Graphinica were started by ex-Gonzo staff members. Sanjigen's president Hiroaki Matsura was an animator on one of the first full 3D TV anime. Pekala, Studio Orange's president, Eiji Inamoto, was a member of the elite team of 3D animators who animated the Tachikoma for Standalone Complex, and because 3D in film is such a young medium, the work of researchers and artists in the 70s and 80s are what have formed the basis for how 3D animation is created today. And to find out more, I asked Austin Hardwick, animator on Rooster Teeth's Genlock, to give a quick rundown of the modern 3D animation process.
A modern CG animation production begins with, well, a script. It's the most cost-effective form of creation. Once we have the script in hand, we can move on to asset creation, storyboards, and voice recording. Asset is a generalized term for a person, weapon, environment, vehicle. If you see it on screen, it's probably an asset, and that means we need to have a concept artist design it. First in 2D with sketches and digital painting, and then we bring it into 3D modeling and we can test textures, shading, and rendering styles. This is the stage where we define the visual style of the entire show. And if the asset needs to be animated, this is the place where our rigging team builds it up with bones and controls. Meanwhile, our storyboarding team is drawing every scene shot by shot. This helps us define the cinematography, blocking, and the visual performance of all the characters. Now, while that's happening, we work with voice actors to record their characters' lines. This is a stage where Japanese studios differ from Western studios, because a Japanese studio will like to have the timing of an entire episode locked down before they start recording any voices. But in America, we tend to not want to start animation in earnest until we have voice recording done, because an actor's performance can affect the timing of a scene so much. Now, with voice recordings and storyboards in hand, our editors can cut together a rough animatic. That's going to look like a rough draft of the entire episode. And it's the last stage that's still in 2D. And now we begin character animation, my favorite part. An animator will open up a file, preloaded with character rigs and audio, and with the guidance of the animatic and the director, finalize the performance of the scene. And then we hand the files off to the camera department so that they can finalize the camera movements of every single shot. At this point, we hand off the files to the hopefully self-explanatory lighting and rendering departments. They light and render. At this point, the episode should be timing locked, which means the compositing team can finalize the look of every single frame, and the audio team can finalize the levels and sound design. And now we just export out a really big video, upload it to a server, and point people to it. Like, literally everybody does that now. Like even when you go to a movie theater, the projector is literally just linking to an off-site server. And that's CG production. Of course, I'm massively oversimplifying it. Productions always end up way, way messier, and all of those steps can just block on top of each other. Like, I've seen a shot where every single one of the departments I just listed, and several of the ones I didn't, are all working on that shot all at once. It's really gross.
3D animation, like most creative industries, is a team effort, and it's worth understanding the process to gain a better understanding of what goes into these shows. Within the anime industry, this idea of teamwork will often go further, with artists and producers sometimes lending a hand over at other companies, even if this is uncredited. When one creator succeeds, other creators around the world are able to learn and expand on this success, and as fans, we get to witness the entire medium advance. Research and development in pre-production is essential for 3D anime. This can be anything from creating new tools and technology for animation to defining the look and feel of a show through concept art and asset development, as Austin was describing before. At Polygon Pictures, they work to develop their own original shaders and character models that are able to capture the appeal of anime from any angle. But for SMDE's High Score Girl and many other 3D anime companies, this time is spent developing pipelines where they'll create the 3D model but then have 2D artists supervise each shot to make sure it always captures the feel of a 2D anime. In High Score Girl, this even went as far as having character models warp in crazy ways just to achieve the image that they want to create. 3D isn't an insular industry within animation. They regularly work with 2D storyboard artists and animators to achieve a specific vision.
And the Oscar goes to... Mimi, you were right. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse finally released in Japan. The film and its artists used a ton of reference footage, and some of that was from anime. And in the same way that the Spider-Verse animation staff took ideas from anime like Land of the Lustrous and Kids on the Slope, so can 3D staffers in Japan take ideas from Spider-Verse. In fact, this is already happening. In May, Sony Pictures animator Tatsuyuki Shimada will be holding a class for CG animators in Japan on the styles of animation at Sony and his work on Into the Spider-Verse. The fusion of 2D elements and 3D, along with using limited keyframes for the sake of timing, is absolutely perfected. Its critical success has only added to the validity of these approaches. It proves that appropriate time for research and development, a unique creative vision, and the freedom to experiment are essential for a product that isn't just a financial and critical success, but also one that will stand out. And in an industry that is producing a ton of anime every season, having a show that stands out among the crowds is extremely valuable. But that is kind of an idealist approach, and whilst CG creators often talk about how anime fans are beginning to accept 3D anime more and more, they're rarely given the chance to deliver to their full capabilities. Executives have their own ideas of when things should come out, but there's a severe imbalance in negotiations for smaller studios that would require more support. Case in point, Kemono Friends. Season 1 was produced in 500 days by 10 people, drastically overworking. The CG work might not be fantastic, but due to the production pressures they were under and the team's ability to create something special regardless, many CG creators from across the industry showed their support, and CG World magazine awarded Studio Yaoyorozu their grand prize in 2017. But when the studio was changed due to copyright issues and a whole lot of other stuff we won't even get into, they gave it to yet another team that wasn't equipped to do so, since based on the fact that it's airing now, they were given a year at most to produce the new show from scratch. The committee's desire to create a season 2 that aired not too long after the first season meant that a new team had to start pre-production, create models, environments, and other assets, and then begin to rig and animate the characters within the space of a year. But the desire to create a quick follow-up was more important than giving the team the time to hire new staff, experiment with new styles, and ultimately make their new vision for the series. In comparison, Toho Animation and the Land of the Lustrous production committee gave Orange the support to double the size of their production staff, allowing them to experiment in pre-production and then move on to an efficient production schedule. That increase in staff has allowed the team to work on more projects as a main producer, like the latest Monster Strike film and the upcoming Beastars. This should be normal. Right now, one of the best examples of CG in anime is the winner of the CG World Awards for last year, Precure All Stars Memories. The film isn't entirely 3D, but the 3D segments managed to capture both the appeal of the original 2D designs whilst fully capitalizing on the advantages of 3D animation with incredibly expressive action. CG characters can sometimes feel cold, but the facial animation and the unique style of shading has a warmth to it that is just so rare in anime. This was largely due to the persistent work of the film's director, Hiroshi Miyamoto. Miyamoto's first big inspiration into the world of 3D was Lord of the Rings, and it shaped his desire to create photorealistic creatures. But when he got his first job at Square Enix, his first task was working on new cutscene material for Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix. It was upon working on this that he went in the entire opposite direction and said, I want to make anime, abandoning his chances of doing photorealism and moving into the anime industry. His main goal now is to make the Precures as fun and expressive as ever, but still have the sort of animation that only 3D specialists can provide. Today, he's one of the most influential directors at Toei Animation and a major force in the studio's 3D approach. When such a high level of work is possible, the only blockade to having 3D staff be able to research and develop their visions is money and time. Producers need to be more aware of the 3D production process, how much it should cost, and why giving these creators the time they need is important. Land of the Lustrous isn't just popular for its source material, it's popular because it's an exceptional adaptation of its source material. And when the entire industry comes to realize that, we will truly be able to achieve a bright digital future. VR is a hot topic right now, and one of the biggest questions for 3D anime creators is how do we use this as a storytelling device? There's plenty of VR experiences that have you flying around in space or riding roller coasters, but anime creators have been working to find their own space. The video before was an experiment as part of the Blu-ray release of Kizumonogatari Part 3, where you watch scenes from the movie with Shinobu. Other experiments include Sword Art Online Replication, where you fight alongside Kirito and Asuna, and Hop Step Sing, a collaboration between Kodansha VR Lab and Polygon Pictures to develop VR idols that appear to be performing just for you the viewer. None of these have particularly taken off outside of a dedicated fan club for Hop, Step, Sing, but most attempts at developing VR anime currently end up in one of these camps. They're either a way to watch videos alongside your favorite characters, anime games with limited interactivity, or ways for the player to be intimate with anime girls. There hasn't been much in the way of using VR as a storytelling medium in anime. Probably the closest we have are Square Enix's VR manga version of Tales of the Wedding Rings, which has the viewer explore through moving panels, and Tokyo Chronos, a visual novel project where you can look around the world in virtual reality. And these are great steps, but they still remain one step away from what many are trying to achieve. A VR experience with the same storytelling appeal of anime, but a level of immersion that a TV screen just can't give you. This has been done before overseas, but large companies aren't willing to fund anything that goes beyond the scale of a short film. This is partly just because the VR install base is limited, and also because of the multiple issues involved in creating an immersive story. For one, how do you acknowledge the viewer? Games like Summer Lesson and Galgun VR make the viewer the center of attention to create a virtual girlfriend or virtual harem-like experience. But many VR films outside of Japan make the player into an observer, which in some ways is best. There's limited interactivity in VR at the moment, so it would be difficult to have you as the player play an important role in the story unless you want to go the Tokyo Chronos route of just making it a visual novel. There's also the issue of cutting. In a film, it's natural to switch shots from perspective to perspective to develop a form of cinematic pacing and style. This just doesn't work in VR at all. You need to create the type of story that has minimal cuts. One anime creator actually tried this with their Kickstarter plan for a Daishogun reboot. Daishogun VR, with Studio Goonies, who works on the CG parts of Show by Rock. It was to be 1 minute long with no cuts. Still a short project, but a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, it made less than a quarter of its crowdfunding goal. And that's basically what it comes down to. Proper VR anime projects more substantial than short films will happen, but the market needs to grow. VR needs to become more accessible, and funding needs to start following creators with specific visions that could only be realized in virtual reality. But whilst that will happen in the next 10 years or so, anime creators are starting to use other video game technologies right now. Over the years, thanks to developments in the video game industry, real-time rendering capabilities, that is, the ability to render things immediately as the player in a game sees them, have shrunk the gap between how 3D animation can be rendered in a video game engine and how it can be pre-rendered within programs like Maya or 3ds Max. And honestly, it's not far off right now. Final Fantasy XV director Hajime Tabata proved this by rendering out detailed assets from the pre-rendered Kingsglaive movie in real time for an Nvidia showcase, and hoped that someday you could achieve the level of graphics in the film during real-time gameplay. And whilst that might just seem like an advantage for games, it also makes 3D animation a lot more efficient. For one, you don't need to wait for something to be rendered out. You don't need a render farm. You also don't need to composite or deal with lighting externally. You can do all of these things in-engine. Disney TV Animation has made advantage of this for the web series Baymax Dreams, produced using Unity. This process halved the production time. It also works for independent creators like Kiwi animator Peter Monga, who is developing his own cartoon series Solo within Unreal Engine 4. Some anime creators have picked up on this too, and it has the potential to solve a large issue within production. Money. 3D is generally more expensive than 2D animation. It involves more roles, the rendering takes forever, and 3D is a more competitive industry with higher wages than the depressing pay for some 2D staffers. So when production companies approach 3D studios for TV anime projects, they can't provide the budget that these studios need. This was the case with Digital Frontier, and so in 2012, they started building their own real-time engine integrated with Maya, since Unity and Unreal Engine didn't have the tools they needed at the time. 5 years later, they developed their first show in the DF real-time engine Infinity Force. It doesn't have the lighting or material detail of other productions like Gantz O, but not everything has to. Real-time rendering hasn't just made 3D animation more efficient, it's made it more accessible. And this is probably the point where I should bring up this.
Hello, how are you?
I'm fine.
Are you engaged?
翻訳してます？してないです。翻訳してくれますか？ルナファミのみんな、おはよう。かぐやルナです。バレンタインデーキー。ハロー、未来やかいだよ。バレンタインデーキー。
I generally can't stand virtual YouTubers, but it's hard to deny the potential in live real-time rendering motion capture. You can model a character, rig it up so it can be animated, and then perform and render through MMD or Unity to a live audience. Although a lot of virtual YouTubers have gone or have started as being corporate spokespeople, there's plenty of these that are just run by one or two people. Take virtual YouTubers to the next level, and even those without huge teams can develop original live content in 3D. But accessibility within 3D animation is more than just about game engines and virtual YouTubers, because even the 3D creation can be made more available. And one of the big parts of that is Blender. If you're trying to develop an animation independently outside of university or a studio, software licenses can get expensive. Autodesk Maya and 3ds Max are the current standard for 3D production in the anime industry, but some studios have become open to supporting the free and open source 3D software Blender. Vyoshimo is a 2D digital animator who we'll be talking about more in the next video, but one of his current projects is the Experiment Lab, a group supported by Twiflow with one of their primary goals being researching how to integrate Blender into the anime workflow. Since most anime have been produced using other creation tools, Blender is an unfamiliar and unnecessary landscape for many. But by supporting Blender, you support self-taught approaches and provide a space for those who couldn't afford the expensive software but have become specialists in Blender. Twiflow is currently recruiting Blender creators for work on their 2020 steampunk film, Kuryu Kappa. When I spoke about how animators on 1990s and early 2000s shows went on to lead major companies in the CG industry today, you may have noticed that they were all men. In fact, today, whilst women have taken up leadership roles within CG companies, there are almost no female CG company presidents, especially in the anime industry. According to census data from the Center of International Research in 1989, Japan was seeing a huge growth in the computer sciences in the 80s, particularly by women. In fact, at the time, 3 times as many women were taking up jobs in computer science. It was still a male-dominated industry, but that statement was becoming less and less true every year. But that didn't really address the business culture, which created a glass ceiling where male animators were more likely to be promoted and more likely to be paid more. In fact, a female animator at Toei Animation just last year stated that she received various forms of harassment and was told she was paid less than her male co-workers just because she was a woman. At SIGGRAPH Asia 2018, creators from Square Enix, Polygon Pictures and Code Chrysalis spoke up about these issues, mentioning that Japan was 114th out of 144 countries on the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report, and that many women were forced to make a decision between having a career or a family. There are ways to mitigate this, making maternity and paternity leave accessible, adopting inclusive recruiting strategies, and highlighting women already in the industry. Steps like these won't just open the doors to new talents, but will make the industry appear less like a reclusive boys' club. These efforts are already being made by games and animation companies across the CG industry to increase the retention and hiring rates of women. There is always more that can be done, especially internally, to weed out toxic behaviors, but in general, things are already moving forwards. One company doing this is Happy Elements Asia Pacific in Tokyo, run by Lai Sharman, which has a roughly 50-50 gender ratio with its staff, and she was able to achieve this by being open about the work environment, establishing maternity and childcare leave, and hiring without discrimination, and focusing on the talent and mindset of the applicant rather than their gender. And when we have an industry that is inviting to new creators regardless of gender, CG anime gets better, new voices get heard and new perspectives get realized. Even within team environments, individual staffers with great skill and great ideas can turn things around and develop an even brighter future for the 3D industry. 3D will have a bright digital future, and if the forces that be allow it, it can become a future that's inviting to even more creators. One where, regardless of whether an animator studied with their student version of Maya or at home with Blender, they have a place within the anime industry. This and real-time rendering opens the door for smaller groups of people to create their own animated stories and expand on the appeal of virtual YouTubers to create other kinds of live animation. And if they decide to build a company, then maybe the producers of the future will understand and respect the process enough to give them the time and resources needed to make the next best thing. Thank you for watching The Canipa Effect. This is the first of a 3-part documentary titled Anime Has a Bright Digital Future. The next part will cover digital animation like Toon Boom and Flash, and the creators all over the world who are making use of these technologies. Videos on this channel are only possible thanks to supporters on patreon.com/thecanipaeffect, and these are just some of the names I'd like to highlight. In particular, I'd like to thank Austin Hardwick, who both supports this channel and appeared in the video, Chariot Wheel, Dedameat, Ellipsism, Frogkun, Hamad, Jakob Gard, JR Pictures, Mike Tamborelli, my own mother, Nolan Soga, Ryan Rodriguez, Shishi, and That You Are Artist. Currently, the Patreon only charges for each video released, which at this rate will likely be one every 3 months or so. But if you want to see more from me, find me on the OtaQuest YouTube channel.